Okay, so good afternoon. I'm Anto Biagio. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do Monday afternoons to try and figure out what the future holds for smarter buildings. So glad to have you with us today. In case you're wondering who we are, profiles are listed on mondaylive.org. And please do remember that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. And let's post questions, comments, and chit chat on the Zoom chat to make this as interactive as possible. Especially today, we'll want to have sort of an open dialogue about what happened in Orlando last week. So that's that. And this slide deck is on mondaylive.org as well if you want any of the material that we have on it. This being February, we are really focused this month on the ASHRAE winter meeting, otherwise known as AHR Expo in Orlando, that was happening last week. I think most of the people on the screen here were there in Orlando, except for Ken. We missed you. So today we're going to be having our normal chit chat and then talking about the AHR, sort of having an open discussion about reactions and observation of what happened in Orlando. So that's the agenda. And I'm going to hand it over to Ken to get us going on news from automated buildings. Over to you, Ken.
Thanks, Anto. Well, unfortunately, I was unable to go, but they did bring me back a T-shirt. So yeah, there I go. So I was there in spirit. I also made a guest appearance virtually, but it sounded like it was an amazing event, and just hearing everybody's remarks back, very positive. Everybody's engaged. Our rooms were full, sometimes full to overflowing. Just a great reception, a great change in attitude. My perception looking from afar is there was a lot of people who had never been to AHR before, which I think is extremely positive for AHR and extremely positive for all of us, because I think we may be part of the reason that we've attracted those people. There's a lot of exciting things went on, and we're going to kind of dive into them in detail in this Monday Live. Probably one of the biggest thing was the announcement of C4SB and as a foundation and the Linux Foundation partnership. And underneath that logo is, if you download the slides, is the actual summit, which was recorded by Kimon. So that's great. I'm really pleased that Automated Buildings is able to get this information online relatively quick. And when we're at a show like that, I think we were on like the day after or something like that. So that works out well. Although this morning there was a bunch of posts and interviews and stuff by Kimon, and they were being daily wasn't fast enough. You have to be sort of hourly and even down to minutely with social media. So exciting stuff, a lot of information. Below that is the sort of the mob that was there, and the Smarter Summit. He's added to feature it. That clicks in there and takes you off into the summary of the summit. Steve posted something interesting on Linux. You know, just the thinking that we may start migrating from a Windows interface or an app or Mac interface to a Linux interface on some of our input devices. And I think that's an interesting article. So just take a look at what he's talking about there. Again, if you click on it, it takes you to the social media post that Steve made. Something else I found interesting was this physical computing with Raspberry Pi, and the first sort of acknowledgement of the small language model. I truly believe that is the future of our industry, is basically pushing this AI out to the edge devices. And having a Linux platform makes that so much easier. And I think we all agree, as I sit in a house here where I've got a 30-year-old panel running my house. Actually, Gary wanted to change your temperature, and I had to start up my Windows 95 system and sign on to the old Delta panel and change the set point. So it's pretty painful, some of our old systems, but they need to be replaced. And I think the fact they haven't replaced them is an incredible opportunity for us to replace them with edge devices that are basically Linux orientated or operating Linux. So I think the announcement, although there's a whole bunch of edges of the announcement, the foundation and the Linux Foundation, uh, it does, as we go open, what's implied in open is that it's not just for the big companies. It does allow the home hobbyists to actually go away and actually dream a new product. So for me, it's very, very much like the start of the DDC industry when we had all these little companies that were making DDC systems. And the hardest part was hardening up the I/O. And we figured out how to do that. So really what we need to do is just replace the brains of most of our panels and control devices. And there's no doubt that almost all of our traditional DDC devices struggle with communications to the point that if you start pulling off the amount of communications you want, the system tends to crash or slow down, and so you've got some of those problems. So I think it's definitely the choice of the new systems and is going to change how we're going to go. Okay, the other one there is the picture at the bottom is my virtual presentation at the first session, which we were surprised. The first session tends to be not all that well attended because everybody's kind of getting their act, trying to get to the show and trying to find out where the bus is. But ironically enough, the room was absolutely chockers, I understand. And so we basically introduced all of the programs we had and talked about the next wave and the scaling, the ability that once we touch this technology, we can scale a lot easier than we have been able to in the past. And our greatest selling session, the one stuffed to overflow, was the one run by Tracy. Thank you very much, Tracy, for doing that. And thank you, Danielle, for stepping in for Keith. That was great. Well, and you did a super job. So it was well attended, people standing in the circle around, I guess, and Fire Marshal hates us. We love it. If you click on our next wave automation on site, it takes you to a summary, and also there's some reviews by a couple of people of the autonomous building session. So I think that's about the main things. So back to you, Anto.
I chime in on that. I talked with Carrie after Ken, by the way.
Yes.
And this is the second year in a row that we've done a session on AI like that. And last year's was attended almost as well as this year's. And we were kind of talking about it. We thought it could be interesting to do an annual sort of an update with AI as the main topic, because there are not many topics in our industry that actually change year over year. So we might actually be able to note some differences year over year like that. So hopefully, if everything works out right, I'd love to participate and pull something together next year too.
Super, and thanks for that comment, because as soon as this meeting leaves, in fact, I might have to leave early. I have a debrief on all our programs at AHR, so I'll feed that back in. Thank you.
Okay, so that's great. Thank you very much, Ken, for that update. Indeed, it was a lot happened that we'll spend the rest of this call talking about this. This is the normal link board. I have updated it, but there's some more updates still to come. But next events are obviously Haystack Connect coming up in May, I think it is, and Realcom coming up in June. Just sort of to anchor what's in ahead of us. Before we dig back into AHR, any other sort of news or thoughts anybody want to share? Hearing nothing, we should just proceed. I think it's good. So AHR, so this is basically the agenda. I'm not going to leave this up for long because we all know this. It's kind of history. But I thought we'd just spend the next 45 minutes or so just sort of going through these and sort of just reflecting, give everybody here a chance. And if anybody in the audience wants to be part of this panel, just sort of say so on chat, and I'll bring you on. If you're there in Orlando and you want to chime in, please let me know. But while you're thinking about that, I'm going to hand it over to Rick to give us a sort of a review of what happened in on the Sunday at the Smarter Summit.
Well, I thought it was a success, despite the fact we had to kind of juggle our the agenda a little bit. And overall, the room was at pretty good capacity, and there were it seemed like a lot of interest in what we were doing in terms of the update and the announcement of C4SB becoming part of the Linux Foundation, and the opportunity to have different voices speaking about what's happening with their personal or their company moving into C4SB or using the IBB, or talking about the sort of voice of the customer from Al from Climatech, and the different voices and the different demos of different systems that are moving towards a more open architecture and the use of IBB and such was, I thought, a really good 2 hours spent updating people and give them a sense of where C4SB is going. Specifically on the Linux announcement, I think for a lot of people it's going to take a little while to understand what the significance of that is going to be, but certainly the fact that Jory Burson was able to be there or get there finally, and for people to be able to ask her questions directly, I think that's really helpful in bringing bringing it home, so to speak. Of the Linux Foundation is now in the building, so to speak, and making it real. And now for it's kind of the next step for people to figure out, okay, now what does that mean to me, to my company, or to my product? And but I thought it was a real good kickoff of the making people aware of what we've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years, and then B, this new move towards the Linux Foundation. And I'll pause.
So, Rick, I was definitely pleased with the attendance and the conversations that ensued. Is a couple questions for you with the move to essentially relaunch C4SB as C4SB Foundation. Okay, I'm assuming that there will be a dedicated website for the foundation, or that you're going to change the current C4SB to reflect that. Is that fair, or how's that going to be handled?
A good question. We're going to keep the existing website because that's c4sb.org already.
Right.
We
Mhm.
also now have C4SB Foundation. I
Right.
think that's .org as well. So there may be just mirrors of the same thing.
Mhm.
We will start to adopt more of the Linux Foundation templates for websites and for how we communicate. So we'll become more Linuxified, I guess. But yeah, we'll keep the same.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
same
that's
website.
where that's why I'm asking the question, is because I think at this stage we're looking to involve as many people, right, as we can into the development of the Linux pathway, if you will, or path going forward. And so I'm not sure how Linux suggests that we capture that or manage that that communication. You know, I know traditionally Facebook, you can often create a Facebook page and people can communicate that way. I'm not sure if that's what Linux's preferences is, but I do think let's think through that mechanism because I would like to make it as easy as possible for people to be communicating with one another in this whole effort.
So at the summit, we also introduced Pete Scanlon's been working on this what we call the placemat, which is really a landscape of all the different things that we are planning or currently endeavoring to do. And one of the interfaces that the Linux Foundation has is sort of a landscape where you can click on the different things that are of interest and then go deeper and figure out how to be involved. So we will be adopting some of those techniques. We also do now have a new a mailbox for info@c4sb.org, and we'll be monitoring that for folks that want to be involved. But over the next few weeks, and we had hoped to have scheduled the first couple of meeting dates already, but those are still in process. Or over the next week or so, we will be releasing a calendar of additional meetings and additional working groups. Will be close behind that.
Yeah, I get all I'm suggesting is for those working groups that people are able to easily get to their working group, can see the chatter going back and forth around various topics. I think that's, and I would think Linux Foundation has some good suggestions on how best to handle that.
Yeah, the LF, as they're called, the LF also has quite a number of tools. One of them is a collaboration tool called LFX. So
Okay.
you'll start to see those kinds of tools that already exist. It's being used by all of the projects.
That's
So you'll
great.
see those tools coming up.
My perception is there'll be no problem for the people that are normally used to using Linux. It's probably going to be more of a problem for our industry to try and figure out how that all works.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to point out, and maybe Anto, you can help us take us through this, but we've talked a lot about the positioning and marketing, and but I wanted to point out that a lot of people did a lot of technical work before this meeting and demonstrated quite a lot of substance. And I'd like to also have a conversation going forward as to how we're going to, turn a bunch of these ideas into further condensed matter. Anto, can you summarize some of the technical innovations that were actually demonstrated?
Yeah, quite a lot. I think the way we frame at the summit, the way we frame what we essentially is actually in response to what Al Newell was saying. Al Newell is the branch manager from Los Angeles of Climatech, and he stood up on stage and at the summit, basically telling the audience, telling us all about the opportunity that came to them from, as it happens, LACC, the largest district in the US. And he framed it as being, we are an integration house, an MSI, system integrator, whatever you want to call it. We're pretty large. We, in this case, is obviously. And we've done work for LACC for 20 years, et cetera, et cetera. But what came from LACCD in this RFP back in September, I think it was an RFP for digital twin, the scope of which was really very broad, much broader than what Climatech or any other sort of system integrator would actually see. Right. So that was their first challenge, is sort of just absorbing what this requirement is all about, because they're talking about asset management, capital planning, CMMS, and all those sort of things. That's not typically something that in the wheelhouse of an SI in the HVAC world. So that was kind of his framing of it. And so the way we sort of continued that in terms of how we responded to that was the whole sort of silo framing that we've talked about quite often on Monday Live. is the fact that all of these different things that the LACCD was referring to, asset management, HVAC, lighting, irrigation, etc., are all different silos that are actually, in the case of LACCD, are actually working just fine. So there's nothing wrong with any of one of them. What was wrong is they, as the LACCD organization, didn't have a holistic visibility of how all of those systems were working to make the facilities safe and environmentally appropriate for students, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the challenge, was how to bring everything together. So in responding that way, we sort of had we sort of continued on how LACCD was framing it as a digital twin, because that is actually a digital twin. So we think about all of these things as digital twins. And essentially what was happening with the digital twin is this concept of the twinning each of the systems that need to be twinned up to the digital twin level. So the twinning, I would argue, is in an innovative sort of approach of actually saying, take any system, whether it's a fire panel that only has dry relay contacts or sophisticated CRM system of some cloud provider. The way you actually make them all consistent in the digital twin is by twinning them. And the twinning process has to accommodate the differences between all of the different existing sort of ways that all of these different systems can communicate. But at the twin level, they're all the same. That then gives the opportunity for a different class of interoperability between those silos that's actually done using these connection profiles that we kept on talking about. So that's at the core is kind of the fundamental innovation, is that we're not really dealing with any of the one systems. We're taking an abstraction of all of the different systems, and it can be all, with no exception, up to this twin level where the owners can think about applications to aggregate the data. Does that make sense, Jim? I know there's some very specific things, but I think you're sort of wanting to see the overall concept that we're
Absolutely.
proposing.
But I would also make the point that that there were a number of demonstrations of actual technology, and you know, we've gone beyond the purely theoretical now, but obviously over the course of the next year, we have to take it even further and demonstrate some of these concepts at scale.
Yeah, it was great to see, again, different voices, whether it was Al, as you said, or Matt and Tristan and Tracy and why am I blanking out? And Dan Bellows was there to show his involvement. There were a bunch of people that have done an awful lot of work to
Al,
be able.
you keep on forgetting Al. The other Al.
Right. No, I'm intentionally forgetting Al. That's part of the deal. The absolutely everybody that did all this work to be able to show progress and to be able to show that this is real. It's not theoretical. It's not just a science project. And so that was great to everybody put in that much time and effort. But even more important is I think that it's a springboard to having more people be paying attention to the IBBs in flight, as we described. There were real IBBs there, and what Nanto just described as the LACCD situation. There's real IBBs that are going to be deployed in that project, and a lot of work has been behind that. So again, I want to thank everybody that did all the work that they did to make the summit as hopefully a turning point in the and everybody can see that that's what it was.
Tracy, did you have any observations of the summit? You were obviously there.
No, I thought it went well. We crammed a whole bunch of information into that period of time. Any one of those topics could have taken up the window that we had, really. So for me, the big takeaways we've talked about, which is, the announcement with the Linux Foundation going forward and what the impact on the industry will be. And I think that's important to remember, even though, we were, as a group or people on this call, as a group were sort of central to making this happen. The baby's out in the wild. The child has graduated or is about to graduate, and it's going to take on a life of its own at this point, I think, and that's something to remember as this gets out into the industry, and there are more companies who, aren't part of this circle. This whole thing is going to grow even further, I think. So that was sort of a big aha moment as I was sitting there listening to the summit. And then I'm with Jim too. I think it's important with our work here in particular to start moving some of the things that were demonstrated, the hands-on actual hardware, software, communicating together, start to move that into more scalable format, right? How, what are the documents we need to hand this to the next company, the next company, the next company to kind of make some of this stuff happen. And I know we all know that that's a piece that's still missing a little bit, but I suspect that's sort of next for that part of the summit as well. So
Yeah, I think generally that sort of can be framed as we're going from conceptualizing an idea into executing. And I think that's really what the last summit last week sort of did. It sort of took us over that threshold. So
Yeah.
when we went over that threshold, Tracy, in the Landmark booth was this here imagery. Can you explain this, please?
sure.
Whose idea was this?
I actually did an educational session in the Landmark sessions, and I led off with this as sort of one of my lead graphics. But if ever before, the whole concept of this, let me take a step back. For those who haven't heard, this is a book by Spencer Johnson. It's a parable about how your choice when things in your life change, right? There are different reactions that people have, ranging from, just paralyzed and complaining and not understanding what happened and not moving forward and dying with whatever your cheese is. Your cheese is gone in the parable. And the other end of it is always be moving and looking forward to the next thing and be nimble and be able to adapt really well to the changing environment. And our industry, as slow as it goes, there have been some really notable movements of our cheese over the years. And everything with the Linux Foundation and going more towards open source, I think is going to be one of the biggest ones that we've seen maybe since, even since DDC kind of took hold back in the day. So it is, to me, I'm predicting that this is really going to sort of change the industry. We'll look back 10 years from now and be able to really see the difference in the impact that all of this has had. So to me, this was perfect. There is interesting reactions, people walking by the booth and seeing this and trying to figure out what the heck the messaging was all about. And so I think we accomplished that part of it for sure. So we even had people coming by and taking pictures and emailing it to their dad or to a friend, and because they all had to read this book in school or whatever it might be. So I think it went over pretty well.
Great graphic.
Yeah, I was kind of pushing the edge there, but I think it worked nicely.
It's abstract at a building automation show to have this showing for sure without a lot of supporting words, and even the words that were sort of in the panel next to this were still sort of following the same thing and not specific about what exactly has changed. And that, I think that fostered some interesting conversations, like I said.
So what actually happened on the booth? I'm going to stop the share because I think that's the last slide I had, and it's only so much cheese that we can take, right? So what happened on the show floor and on the booth and other conversations? Anybody want to reflect on that?
General or specific to Linux Foundation, etc.
Anything.
Okay, anything. Well, I guess, from a selfish perspective, our booth was very well attended, the ISMA Controlli booth. So the show traffic was Monday and Tuesday were but what you could hope for, basically nonstop. So that was terrific. Wednesday is often a slow day regardless, but we met and arguably exceeded our expectations for traffic to our booth. So, we left very happy in that regard. The comment was made earlier about some people who were attending the show that are new to the industry. And I did see a little bit of that, which was interesting. Well, mostly from the standpoint of new vendors who are new to the industry and trying to see if what they're selling might have a place in the HVAC world. That's where I picked up on that a couple times. But yeah, I think from a technology standpoint, I would say the migration to IP in general is getting stronger, which was good to see.
Did anyone hear what the final attendance numbers or estimate was? By any chance? It seemed to be the busiest one since pre-COVID, I would say. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, which is good. And we were kind of tucked back way in the back there in the Lawnmark booth, but it seemed like a relatively steady stream of people coming by. I think it was mostly people that were connected to one of the entities that were in that booth with us, perhaps, or a referral from one of the educational sessions. I know a number of people stopped by after that. But it seemed relatively steady, and I'm glad to hear, Steve, that you guys had good traffic. Jim, I'm assuming you guys had good traffic too.
Yeah, we did. I would, as a general observation, I had a speaking track in Ken's automated building session on cybersecurity, which was fully attended. And there seemed to be a lot of interest on that topic. I don't know if we were one of the only vendors talking about cybersecurity on the floor, but we certainly had plenty of traffic from that and a lot of interest. And I really get the feeling that on cybersecurity, we've been talking about it for a decade, but now we're actually seeing a lot of jobs, and there are a lot of system integrators in the channel that realize, wow, I need to get on this now. So I thought, besides the Linux Foundation launch, I didn't see very much new at the show. A lot of the usual suspects. I do agree with Steve's insight that things are drifting to IP more and more. But I see the real beginnings of cybersecurity commercially now, moving beyond the rhetoric. So I thought that was encouraging as well.
We normally catch up with the management and get sort of a preview of the number, and I'm usually able to tip that. Near as we can figure, they were too busy to give us that number. But we did have room monitors and scanning badges and stuff, so we were able to take a look at quick looks at who was attending, and of course it confirmed that there was real names and bodies behind all of those people that were sitting in the rooms. We had amazing attendance in almost all of our sessions, and right through Wednesday. I mean, Wednesday has always been kind of a dead day, but we were worried how that would work, but and I understand that the IBB session went well on Wednesday as well. So yeah, great. It seemed like a great show. I doubt that it would be bigger than Chicago, but we'll see.
Yeah, Chicago normally gets the largest numbers, but it felt busy for
It
most
did.
of the
It did. When was the last time we were in Chicago?
last
Last
year.
Last year.
Was that just last year? I was thinking that was
Come on,
Vegas.
Tracy.
You're getting budgy.
I felt this one had many more bodies on the floor than Chicago. I know it's spread out a little bit differently, but it just seemed like anytime I tried to walk anywhere, go anywhere, it was dodging people the entire time, everywhere.
What was the sense of international?
That's a great
Orlando
thing,
tends
Ken.
to, sorry?
I saw a lot less international than I have in years.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
I saw very little international, in fact. You know, there were years where, you know, there were huge Asian contingents, Chinese contingents, Latin American contingents. And I did not see that this year.
So it's good to hear that report from you, Steve, because that's really sort of the fundamental of a trade show, is having that kind of more transactional kind of meetings and opportunities, in addition to sort of, let's say, thought leadership and sort of a networking chit chat, which is really what you've been focused on, Rick. I'm going to come back to you, Rick, because that's really what you were talking. You were sort of just networking following the summit on C4SB. Can you, around the subject of C4SB, can you sort of reflect on how those conversations went and what the reactions were from all sorts of people?
Yeah, it was there are a couple different aspects. One was by having Jory Burson on the floor on Monday, to be able to walk around with her and talk about C4SB and talk about Linux with different vendors at their booth, or just randomly in the hall, or side conversations. Yeah, well, first of all, her reaction to that massive trade show, and she's, you know, she goes across all industries, right? Linux Foundation isn't just about this, and so she goes to a lot of trade shows. She's seen a lot of conferences. She was sort of blown away by the sheer magnitude of it, and the energy, and the sort of the dynamic nature of this trade show. It was not boring, and it was so that was kind of an outsider's view of our industry. Is, to her, it seemed like there was a lot going on, and that's trivializing, but that was her general, you know, blown away kind of, which was part of what we wanted to have the Linux Foundation understand, is that we're, you know, it's a big industry. And so we were in the controls part for a while, and we had conversations with, you know, thanks to the introductions that a lot of you did, which I really appreciate. She was able to meet an awful lot of people from some pretty important organizations, both organizations and companies and individuals in the industry. It gave her a great idea of how connected we already are, and how kind of a small world that our part of the industry is. And for me to be able to have people explaining to Jory what they do, or what their view of the future is, or what their view of the Linux Foundation, or the importance of the Linux Foundation being part of the industry, I got to stand there and listen to, and some of you guys were sometimes some of the speakers, people describing what they saw as the future of the industry. And I was wishing I had my notepad and could just take notes on half of what people were saying, because how people were describing to Jory, a newcomer, what they do and what they see as the future was fascinating. And absolutely everybody talked about the value of open interoperability, true interoperability. Everybody described that that's something that their customers want. even coming from some vendors that you would not have expected to hear that from. So it was that was quite fascinating to hear how the conversations will be different if you're introducing this thing called Linux to them. And then we also went up front, to the big part of to where the big iron is, and had a couple of conversations with some of the, the household name brands as well, and got their position on the future of the industry and what they think their company is going to do to try and leverage interoperability. All the conversations were, of course, around Linux and around open, but to hear people be so fluent in being able to describe how their company or their product was going to be taking advantage of cloud and all was quite impressive. And again, Jory was blown away. So she also she picks up on politics and she picks up on dynamics of what's going on in an industry pretty quick. So that was another, I won't go into all those details, but that was also pretty fascinating.
So Rick, what was
I want,
the awareness that you observed about the Linux Foundation itself in those conversations?
So almost everybody, understood what Linux Foundation is in terms of Linux being the operating system. As Jory had described, everybody knows it as a kernel. Not many people know that there's these other 100,000 or thousands and thousands of other projects. But everybody understood that Linux means open. Linux means faster to market. Linux means competitiveness and those things. And that's, so they'd immediately go into a discussion of what they do, what their company does in that context, in the context of open and speed to market. And
But they didn't necessarily relate to the foundation aspect. Like, oh yeah, I've heard of the Linux Foundation.
I'm not sure I even knew whether there was a foundation, the word foundations, honestly, but the way that the foundation hosts openness or promotes openness, that seemed to be what people knew. Linux means community, it means open.
I think people understand the concept of Linux and the openness, but people are not aware of how it actually happens, which is what the foundation is all about.
Yeah, exactly.
The word.
Right.
I just think we got to do a lot of marketing there because at the end of the day, we're looking for participation, both man hours and also in dollars. And so if we don't, drive home those points, we're not going to achieve, I think, the outcome we're hoping for here.
There was awareness of the Linux Foundation does like to collect money for membership. There was quite an awareness.
Okay. All right.
Got that one straight. So the other, when I was walking around with Jory, we were chatting, and the other sort of aspect that she found intriguing was there's this huge trade show, and 99% of the products being shown are mechanical products, right? Pumps and valves and ladders and all that kind of stuff. And she says she basically in her mind was sort of going through the thought of, yes, and all of those mechanical products need digital information for them to work properly. That's the way, just sort of thinking about it from Linux Foundation's perspective. This is all mechanical stuff. Obviously, a valve or a VAV is not fundamentally an open source thing, right? It's just a thing, right? But there's information that can be applied to that, and that's the focus, which is, I thought, really, really interesting. So David, you
go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to chime in and ask David for his remote observation, because you were obviously not there in Orlando, David. Can you share your thoughts? Are you with us?
Yes, I am. I think that this is obviously all really good progress, and I think as the leadership of this industry ages and new leadership and the next generation come in to run things, this is a necessary transition that the industry needs to make. And seeing as how it went smoothly and seemed to be welcomed with open arms, I think is a good indication that there's an appetite for change and that there's an opportunity to implement that change as well. And it's a thing where, you know, we now have to really manifest this in implementable things that show real value. And I think we're well on the path. And I think a lot of the demos that were shared show that things are trending in the right direction. But this is where I think it's going to come down to getting savvy early adopters, like we've talked about, you know, that are typically the ones that are leading the way, that universities that have a large portfolio and a lot of energy use that they need to manage. Those are the types of first movers we're going to need to see adopt things like this and endorse it and join the Linux Foundation through C4SB. And that's going to, you know, shift this into the next gear. At least that's my hot take. How does that sound, Anto?
That's great. And the generational change that you started off, that's obviously a biggie. Major biggie.
So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we need to enable software to eat this industry, and Linux is the path to getting there.
So David, I know you come from a very strong end user perspective. Do you feel like certain end users or some of your end users will want to participate in the Linux Foundation in some fashion?
I could see some for sure. I don't want to name names and feign obligating them to do so, but I could totally see, just like large universities.
Right.
I mean, I could totally see comp sci department jumping into this and like getting into it and doing something for their engineering building and using their own buildings as test beds and things like that, which we've seen things in fits and starts over the last couple of decades. But I could see universities really jumping in with both feet, because then they could open source the IP they create and it could be a recruiting tool and blah, blah, blah. But I could also see large multinational corporations leveraging it. But where I see it, something where it could be massively used but not advertised, is optimizing data center operations.
Right.
That was my motivation of bringing up the Jory comments about mechanical and digital. It's the enormity of what she saw in terms of the mechanical stuff that's not been digitized. That is the point, right?
That was, she said that to me as well. It's just none of these have an Ethernet port, you know.
I mean,
they do. The funny thing, a lot of them do, but the point was they're not leveraging data. They're not leveraging AI. Everybody talks about it, but you know, show me.
I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people who run data centers, and obviously it's changed and things have gotten better, but I always ask the question, how do you know when you're running on generator power? And they're like, when I see smoke coming out of the generator outside.
Yeah.
Pretty good answer.
How else would you
know?
And
it's like, okay, that means failover works properly, but God help us, you know.
Yeah.
We should be better than this.
David, I can't remember her name, but there was a woman who stood up during the summit who crystallized the whole purpose for what we're doing when she made the statement, you can't measure what you can't see.
Yeah. And I used to quote that a lot, I get the joke, but I can't, I used to use, you can't manage what you
I
can't
think I know
measure.
them, right? You can't manage what you,
And,
right.
but the thing is, talking from a real estate investor standpoint, they only care about NOI and return on investment and hold time. So we still need to be working towards the value story to that contingent. When they're buying assets and it's a 5-year fund and they're only going to hold for 3 years, we need a really good value story for them to make the investment while they're owning it so they can sell it for an even better price. And that's where I see this really taking off, is when we can have that hold time that a real estate investor thinks about. This is just a thing you just automatically implement when you take ownership, and then you always see a 5x or 10x on the investment to controls that you put in when you go to sell.
That was Sharon, by the way. She's on this call.
I'm watching her. I'm responding to her chat.
Yeah, everybody sees it. Thanks.
Yeah,
So,
just look
Anto, what do you think? We've had a lot of reflections about what the Linux Foundation means for players in our industry. Do you think that this will be an invitation from others to come from outside and disrupt somehow or get involved in the industry that haven't been from IT or other quadrants?
Okay. I would hope that the answer of that is yes. And hopefully what we can do as sort of leadership or guides to this process is to make sure that whatever's being done is being done right or appropriate. Because that's one of the things that we've seen when new people come in, especially when with a lot of money, like in the IT players that have come over the decades. They tend to come with a naive view and kind of a very different perspective and give up after a few years. I'm hoping that the new people that's coming in through this process would be able to assimilate a lot of the domain expertise that this group and also a broader group already has. So it's not wasted. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's the way I was sort of thinking about it.
So it'd be interesting to see, how the Linux Foundation promotes these different silos in their own group and see what happens next. I wouldn't expect it to be very fast, but potentially somebody could be interested.
Mm-hmm. And bring some innovation.
That's right.
Into this space. Nothing wrong with that. Just looking up the chat. Your comment, Danielle, about Belimo is interesting. That I guess that's a trend. That's great. Less than 10%, but it's greater than 0, which would have been some years ago. I think Chicago is still the biggest AHR because of its catchment area, despite being really cold and horrid. I think a lot of people just drive there and just sort of turn up for the Chicago event.
It's back there 2 years from now.
Yeah.
Next year.
Yeah, okay. Next year we're in Vegas. Yay. So all in all, we're nearly wrapping up here. How do we want to wrap this? We should focus next week because we have one more week in February. So if we've done this week sort of a recap and sort of analysis of what's happened, it would sort of make sense for next week to have a sort of what's next, where does this take us kind of conversation. Does that make sense? Do you have
Yep.
any thoughts? How do we grab this tiger by the tail kind of a thing?
That's why I sort of brought up the questions around how could be influenced by the Linux Foundation in terms of communications. So how do we reach out and communicate and sort of prioritize what we think the most important things are to get done in the next few months, so we don't lose the momentum. And then sort of try to divide and conquer, and not only amongst ourselves, but amongst others that we know of that you know are not always on the Monday Live call.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I think that's good. Any brief thoughts on moving on, Jim, before we wrap up?
No, I think that's it. I'm looking forward to both advancing the technical and the positioning pieces of Linux Foundation and IBB. So I think it's going to be an interesting year. Thanks, Anto.
Cool. Tracy, any closing words?
No, I'm in line with what Jim just said, actually. So
Okay.
we have a lot to explore this coming year with all the changes. We'll have plenty to talk about.
Lots of different cheeses to try.
Yep.
David, any final words of wisdom from you?
No.
Out of wisdom.
Out of wisdom. He had one word. Okay,
That was
that puts
probably
it
the
back to
wisest thing I've said in a long time.
yeah. Rick, so it gives you the last word, Rick.
I just wanted to thank everybody for everything that went into getting the planning and then the executing of the summit, and also the booth and the sessions. It really, I think, exceeded expectations in a lot of different ways. And again, Jory was she's excited, and on behalf of the Linux Foundation, she was like, duly impressed and excited about the fact that this group is so well connected already, and that positions Sol for the Linux Foundation to have a running start at having an impact on the industry.
Fantastic.
Cool.
See
So
y'all.
with that, let's wrap and see you next week. Have a great week. I'll get the video out
y'all.
soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.